It's the wild, wild west, and it's only getting wilder. A little over a week since the free agency period has began in the NBA, and we went over the Eastern Conference a little earlier in the week. I gave my grades to teams in the Eastern Conference based on the transactions that they made to this point, as far as it goes from free agency and trades made and even some coaching hires here and there. But, I wanted to now get to the Western Conference and to kind of evaluate what teams in the West have done and assign each team a grade and, kind of also give a landscape of what the Western Conference looks like to this point, just as I did with the East in terms of, having that tier system and grouping the teams into the tiers like I did with the Eastern Conference. So we're going to do the same thing with the Western Conference, starting in the Pacific Division. So kicking things off in the Pacific Division, I wanted to start with the Los Angeles Clippers, a very interesting team over the course of the past 5 seasons, right? Remember, they acquired both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in the 2019 offseason, and since then have been kind of disappointing, right? When you look at the Clippers, I think for them, the main issue has always been health. Every season after season, we always prefaced how good the Clippers could be with the caveat of, if they're healthy, they can contend for the West, or if they're healthy, they can win it all. But, those ifs never manufactured into reality, right? And I think at the end of the day, with that being the case, I think the Clippers front office had kind of had enough as well. I mean, not to say that they didn't want to bring back Paul George, but the demands that Paul George was making on that contract weren't something they were comfortable with fulfilling, and he decided to go another direction, and he signed with the Philadelphia 76ers. He signed a 4-year max $212 million deal to go to Philly. And that definitely, to me, when I'm evaluating the Clippers as far as their grade goes, was a blow, right? But then I take a look at their free agent acquisitions in addition to losing Paul George. Remember, they did bring back James Harden on a 2-year deal, along with signing Chris Dunn to back him up, right? A defensive-minded point guard who's improved his three-point shooting over the past 2 years. They brought in Mo Bamba, who's a very good shooter in his own right at 7 feet tall. They brought back Nicholas Batum on a 2-year deal, a very nice wing for them that can also knock down that three-point shot. An interesting signing there with Kevin Porter Jr., and then they brought in Derrick Jones Jr. of the Dallas Mavericks, right? And then in addition to that, they also did draft Cam Christie. So overall, I gave them a C+. They lost Paul George, they lost Mason Plumlee, but I do think they did as good of a job as they could in free agency of kind of trying to fill that void as well as trying to balance out the rest of their team. So I gave them a C+. Moving on to the Suns. The Suns, full disclosure, I'm not really a fan of their roster construction, right? I think having Bradley Beal and Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, who to me are kind of, at times, I saw this on Twitter, they said they're all kind of lesser versions of one another, right? You talk about Kevin Durant, who's the best version. Devin Booker's a lesser version of Kevin Durant. And then you have Bradley Beal, who's a lesser version of Devin Booker, right? They all kind of do the same thing with, having that redundant skill sets of being able to score, but not really being able to get their teammates involved. So to me, a big need is that point guard position. Well, they kind of addressed it. I'm very much intrigued by the Monte Morris signing, right? I think he is a guy that has played very well over the course of his career. He's averaged 10 points a game while 47% shooting from the field and 39.1% shooting from 3. This is over the course of his career, but this last season, he battled injury and his numbers weren't all that impressive. But his last full season in Washington, he averaged 10.3 points a game, 5.3 assists off 48% shooting from the field and 38.2% shooting from 3, right? So he can shoot the 3. He's able to kind of get his teammates involved. And on top of that, he can score, right? So I think getting a guy like him intrigues me to a degree, but I'm not confident in that signing. So it remains to be seen how good that signing will be. They did get Mason Plumlee to shore up that front court, along with drafting Ryan Dunn and Oso Ighodaro as well. So I definitely like the signing of Monte Morris. Like I said, I'm not super confident in it, but I like the idea of it effectively if it can work out. So I gave them a C+ grade. I also like the hiring of head coach Mike Budenholzer. I think he can definitely get their offense working in a way that Frank Vogel could not last season. So curious to see how that pans out. Moving on to the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers, not a team that has done much in free agency. The Lakers, their biggest kind of news that they made was drafting LeBron's son, Bronny James, right? And, I'm definitely going to drop a video here in the near future, kind of covering that a little bit more in depth. But outside of drafting Bronny James and Dalton Connect and both signing extensions for, LeBron himself and Max Christie, there wasn't really a whole lot to go off of. They did lose Torian Prince and they hired JJ Redick. And the coaching decision to me, in addition to the inactivity for free agency, is why I gave them this D grade, right? They had Dan Hurley, in their sights. They brought him in, they lowballed him, and then went for a guy in JJ Redick who has no experience. Now, I am high on JJ Redick and his basketball knowledge and his basketball IQ. I think he could be a very good head coach one day, but I don't think if you want to contend, if you want to win, especially with having a 38, 39-year-old, LeBron James on your team, this is how you go about doing it. We already tried a rookie head coach in Darvin Ham last year or the last 2 years, and now you're bringing in another coach who has even less experience than him, right? And on top of that, he's kind of the second choice head coach because you originally wanted Danny Hurley. I think they really botched this offseason to this point, so that's the reason I gave them a D. Moving on to Sacramento. Grading the Sacramento Kings proved to be an actual tricky endeavor. It was kind of tough to kind of determine where I wanted to place them in terms of grade, because it was okay, the biggest deal for them was getting DeMar DeRozan, right? So how do I look at that acquisition of DeMar DeRozan? It was really tough for me to assess that, because at the end of the day, I like them getting DeMar DeRozan in that sign and trade with, it was a 3-team sign and trade with the Spurs and the Chicago Bulls, right? So in that 3-team deal, right, obviously the Kings received DeMar DeRozan, the Bulls received Chris Duarte from Sacramento, right, a very solid 3-point shooter, on the younger side, but still could shoot the 3-ball pretty relatively well. Right, they also received 2 second-round picks along with Raekwon Gray from San Antonio, and the Spurs themselves received Harrison Barnes and a 2031 unprotected pick from Sacramento. And the way that I look at that when I'm evaluating the trade from Sacramento's perspective, it's very much of, okay, they upgraded for sure, right? They got a 24-point per game scorer in exchange for Harrison Barnes and Chris Duarte and some picks. Cool. And DeMar DeRozan, they got him locked down for the next 3 years. They signed him to a 3-year, $76 million deal. But yeah, he can score 24 points per game on 48% shooting from the field. But that 3-point percentage is not relatively favorable in today's NBA, right? And on top of that, you're putting him on a team that already kind of has struggled shooting the 3-point shot, right? So it's very much a iffy trade for me in terms of, yeah, they upgraded, but at the same time, how much did they really upgrade, right? Which was why I struggled to kind of arrive at a grade for them. So I did give them a B-. I did like the acquisition of Jalen McDaniels as well in addition to that. And I do think it was a good idea locking down Malik Monk and Alex Len. So I did give them a B-. As far as the Warriors go, the Warriors, I gave them a C. The highlight of their offseason, or the headline of their offseason, was losing Klay Thompson. And I'm not super high on that loss. I know a lot of basketball minds are saying, oh, he was definitely, it's definitely addition by subtraction, but I'm not sold on that. Klay Thompson was a guy that, yes, his shot selection was questionable. Yes, at times his mood might have brought down the team, but he, to me, was still a net add to that team, right? A guy that can space the floor, even though they did get Buddy Hield in sign and trade, a 38.6% 3-point shooter, a very good 3-point shooter. He did play in Philly this last season, but at the same time, in the postseason, he was unplayable, right? They could not find time for him on the floor in the postseason, so I don't know how much of an upgrade he truly is, right? I do like DeAnthony Melton, a good 3-point shooter, very good perimeter defender as well, and I did like the acquisition of Kyle Anderson there as well, and they also did lose Chris Paul. So all in all, I decided to get Golden State a C because I didn't love their offseason, but I didn't hate it either. I definitely think there's room for improvement, and who knows, maybe they land a Larry Markkinen as the offseason progresses, and that'll definitely bump their grade up. But that wraps it up for the Pacific Division. Moving on to the Northwest Division. So taking a look at the Northwest Division, starting with the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder, man, what a season they had last year. No one really expected them to play as well as they did, and they really came out of nowhere. But, they had a very good season, finishing as number one in the Western Conference. And obviously the disappointing end, losing to Dallas in the second round. But to me, a very good season. And I think they followed that season up with a very, very strong off season, right? They retained Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. Isaiah Joe, a very good 3-point shooter for Oklahoma City, and then brought in Isaiah Hartenstein from the Knicks. Very, very key acquisition there, because if you look at Oklahoma City and what they struggled with, especially against Dallas last season, what was it? Rebounding. How do you fix that? How do you shore up that weakness? And bringing in a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein is definitely the way to go. A guy who can rebound the ball very well. He was very good on the offensive glass last season for the New York Knicks, and I definitely think it's a loss for the Knicks not retaining his services, and gain for Oklahoma City bringing him in. So you brought him in. In addition to Isaiah Hartenstein, they also brought in Alex Caruso. They got him by trading away Josh Giddey to Chicago. He is such an upgrade over Giddey, in my opinion, because of his ability to not only shoot the three, but also defend on the perimeter. So a very good perimeter defender in Alex Caruso now joins the Oklahoma City Thunder, who already have Kassan Wallace, who proved in his rookie year to be an excellent perimeter defensive guard, and Lou Dort, who we know what he can bring as well. I mean, they call him the Dortcher Chamber, for goodness sake, right? So you now bring Alex Caruso into the mix, so you now shore up your perimeter defense. You shore up your ability to rebound as well, which was I don't even want to say the perimeter defense was a weakness, but shoring up the rebounding weakness definitely is a net positive. In addition to the draft picks that they made in Nikola Topic with the 12th pick and Dylan Jones as well, they had to get a B+ for me. It was almost an A, but I still feel like there's more they can do to get to that A. But definitely a great offseason for them. As it pertains to Denver, the Nuggets, they kind of are, they're going down a scary trend, if you will. The last two seasons, they're losing guys that were key components on that championship that they won a season ago in 2023, right? Season before, they lost Jeff Green along with, Bruce Brown. And then this season, they're losing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, KCP, right? A huge, huge deal, as he's one of their best perimeter defenders, in addition to the fact that he's one of their better 3-point shooters as well. So losing him, to me, is definitely a big deal, right? In addition to losing Reggie Jackson, who was not as big of a loss, in my opinion, a good solid guard. He did make timely shots, but at the same time, not as big of a loss as KCP was. They did bring in Dario Saric. I do like that acquisition. They extended DeAndre Jordan and Vlatko Kankar, but there's not much after that I really thought, oh, well, this is definitely going to help Denver going into next year. So I gave them a C-. As far as it goes for the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that lost in the conference finals last year, right? They definitely also exceeded expectations as well, upsetting Denver in the second round. So far this offseason, though, they were able to draft Rob Dillingham. I really like the acquisition there of getting him, and potentially a point guard to replace Mike Conley at some point, right? And can learn from Mike Conley. I'm not super high on draft picks, but I definitely like Rob Dillingham and the potential there created by the environment of having a Mike Conley to mentor him. I like the acquisition of PJ Dozier, and I like the veteran acquisition of Joe Ingles after they lost Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin, and Monte Morris. So I gave them a B-. I definitely like their offseason more than I like Denver's. But at the same time, I still don't know if it's a whole lot to move the needle. But I do think they're a better team, so gave them a B-. As far as Utah goes, the Jazz, definitely a team that's in the midst of a rebuild, right? And I like the fact that they were able to exploit that rebuild with 3 picks. They drafted Cody Williams 10th overall, Isaiah Collier 29th overall, and Kyle Filipowski. So I do like the fact that they were able to kind of start drafting players that may or may not be the pillars of their franchise going forward, but we'll see. That remains to be seen. And because those guys, to me, are relatively unpredictable and we don't know how good they are going to be, I decided to roll with a C for the Utah Jazz. And then another rebuilding team here with the Portland Trailblazers. The reason I gave them a lower grade than Utah is because they've done absolutely nothing, right? They've they traded for Denny Avdia, and I like that acquisition. But at the same time, they only drafted Donovan Clingan. He was their only other, acquisition, if you will, so far this offseason. No extensions, no free agent signings. They did trade away Malcolm Brogdon to get Advia, which to me would have been a nice player to keep to kind of start building professionalism, especially as it pertains to looking for intrinsic development with Scoot Henderson. But, at the end of the day, I'm not super impressed with what they've done, so I gave them a C-. Moving on to the Southwest Division, right? The Southwest Division, starting with Dallas, the defending Western Conference champions, who I think have also had a very good offseason, or let me not say very good, a good offseason to a degree. What depends on if they have a very good offseason is some of it is going to be intrinsic development, right? When your stars or star players, specifically when it pertains to Luka, isn't that great of a perimeter defender and is almost a liability to a point where they exploit him repeatedly like Boston did in the finals, you kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, they just need Luka to be better. But at the same time, there were some edges around the roster that could have definitely been refined, and I think they did that this offseason, right? So getting a guy like Klay Thompson, signing him on for 3 years, it was a sign and trade, like I said before, signing him on for 3 years, a guy that can shoot the three, right? One of the things in addition to the defense that Dallas struggled with in this final series was the ability to shoot the three, especially the wide open threes. Well, Klay Thompson, he'll definitely knock down the open threes, especially in the corner when you need him to. So definitely great acquisition there. Najee Marshall, another very solid three-point shooter, much better defender than Klay Thompson. So adding him can definitely shore up that defense on the perimeter, in addition to trading for Quentin Grimes as well, another perimeter defender that can shoot the three. So they're loading up on those 3-and-D guys. Even though Klay has lost a step defensively, I still think he can compete. So you have Klay Thompson, Najee Marshall, and Quentin Grimes. I definitely like all three of those acquisitions. And to juxtapose what they gained, they also just lost Tim Hardaway Jr., who had been struggling kind of over the course of the past couple of seasons in Dallas, right? Derrick Jones Jr. signed with the Clippers, but couldn't really knock down the open shot, the open three, when they needed him to this past postseason. And then Josh Green. Josh Green is probably the biggest to me of those losses because at the end of the day, he was young and up and coming. He could shoot the three. He was starting to improve on shooting the three and definitely competed defensively. So all in all, I gave the Mavericks a B. The Pelicans, I gave a C+. I love the DeJounte Murray acquisition. I think that was very good for them. But outside of that, not a whole lot has been done. They did acquire Daniel Tice, but they lost Jonas Valanciunas, Najee Marshall, Cody Zeller, EJ Liddell, and Larry Nance Jr. So I gave them a C+ because I do think they got better in the point guard department. I'm curious to see what they do with CJ McCollum going forward, but all in all, I still think they earned that C+ grade. Next is the Rockets, a team I'm very high on. I think that they can definitely, take that step, take a little bit of a leap coming into next year. I liked the acquisition of AJ Griffin from Atlanta, right? It was definitely a guy that can stretch the floor with the three-point shot in addition to defend. So I like him in addition to, keeping Aaron Holiday under contract for the next 2 years and the drafting of Reed Shepherd. The Memphis Grizzlies I gave a C- to because they really haven't done much outside of drafting Zach Edey and Jalen Wells. And the only reason I'm even giving them a C- is because of drafting Zach Edey. I think Zach Edey will do very nice things for them going forward. And then we have the San Antonio Spurs, a team that I really liked what they did, but at the same time, because of their standing, I wanted to kind of temper what they did to a degree to kind of fit where they are, if that makes sense, right? So I very much like them bringing in Chris Paul, a veteran point guard, a Hall of Famer, one of the best point guards to ever play basketball, to come in and mentor the young Victor Wembanyama, right? To play with him, because to me last year, San Antonio definitely had a shortage of high IQ basketball players on that team outside of Wemby. And I think bringing in a guy like Chris Paul definitely helps that team, and not just Wemby, but other players that may or may not be a part of that San Antonio core going forward, in addition to acquiring that unprotected pick from Sacramento. I like what they did there. I like getting Harrison Barnes, and I like the drafting of Stephon Castle. So I gave him a C+ as a result of those acquisitions. And that kind of wraps up my Western Conference grades. And now we're going to take a look at how the state of the Western Conference is through the tier system that I used, similar with the Eastern Conference as well. We're going to take a look at that with the West. So looking at the tiers in the Western Conference, we're going to start at the top, right? Start at the tippy top with the prestigious tier, right? The prestigious teams, this is an exclusive club, the prestigious club, if you will, of the Western Conference. And it consists of these four teams, right? The Dallas Mavericks, the defending Western Conference champions, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the runner-up in the West, if you will, right? Because they did lose to Dallas in the conference finals, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Denver Nuggets. I have them grouped in that order. I'm going to go from left to right in terms of which team is better as far as the tiers go. I have that in that order because I do think Dallas still has the top two player, if not the best player in the NBA in Luka Doncic, right? And then on top of that, they got better where it mattered most in terms of 3-and-D players, right? Guys who can knock down the three as well as defend as well. So I think they did a good job, and I still like the completeness of their roster with Kyrie Irving. I'm expecting things out of potentially the rookie. I think his name is Olivier Maxence Prosper. I think he's going to take a second-year leap as well. So I definitely think to this point, they're still the best team in the West, and I think I'm going to give them that title and let them have it until they are knocked off. The Timberwolves, to me, are the second best team in the West because if I'm taking a look at top five players, I think Anthony Edwards is a top five player, right? I think that defense that they had being the best in the league, I think it's going to stay one of the best, if not the best in the league going forward. And having a star like Anthony Edwards leading you definitely won't hurt going forward as well. I like the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? Getting their weaknesses shored up this offseason to me was key, and it was huge, right? I still think they were a little young, but I think they can definitely take that leap and easily beat either one of those two teams in front of them. I have no doubt in my mind maybe they could represent the West in the NBA Finals. And then Denver I have on the lowest tier. They have the best player in the NBA, or top two, like I said, between him and Luka. But at the same time, I think they keep losing players that I think are key and instrumental. And maybe the intrinsic development of their team will work and benefit them in the long run with guys like Christian Brown and Julian Strother. Maybe those guys will step up and take big roles, but I don't like the trend of them losing instrumental pieces of that 2023 championship team. They're trying to get in the club tier. The New Orleans Pelicans, a very solid team. I like their young core with Zion and maybe Brandon Ingram. We'll see if they trade or retain him. I do like the acquisition of DeJounte Murray. I think he definitely helps them. And we'll see what happens with CJ McCollum, like I said, going forward. And then I like Sacramento, too. The DeMar DeRozan acquisition, to me, still iffy on it. Don't know what it's going to do for them, but I think they're still one of the better teams in the West. The Memphis Grizzlies they're a tricky team, right? Ja was out for last year and didn't play for most of the year and came back, and they look good at times, but still I think weren't as good as they wanted to be. I like the acquisition of Edey in the middle. I still think Jaren Jackson Jr. can play, Desmond Bane, those guys. I still think they're very solid. So I have them of trying to get in the club because they were in the Western Conference semis against Golden State 2 years ago. So I'm not going to write them off just yet. The competitive but non-threatening teams, right? The Lakers, the Suns, the Clippers, the Rockets. Any one of these teams could definitely beat the team in the tier above them. But at the same time, they're not really threats to win the West. I think any one of the four teams in the prestigious club would make easy work of them, to be quite honest with you. But at the same time, they're still very, very competitive and are not to be taken lightly. They're trying to find themselves tier, the Warriors and the Spurs. The Warriors with losing Clay and, using their young team in terms of Brandon Pajemski and Jonathan Kuminga, along with, Steph and, Andrew Wiggins is still there and Draymond Green. So they still have good players and some players that are developing, and we'll see what they look like going forward. But I still think they're trying to find themselves. And the Spurs, look, they really should be a rebuilding team, I know, but I'm willing to say they're finding themselves because I do think the impact Chris Paul will have on Wemby, and having another high IQ player with Wembanyama will make them a tier above the rebuilding teams. And then you have the rebuilding teams. You have the Utah Jazzes of the world who are clearly rebuilding and might even trade away Lauri Markkanen. But, the direction is defined, right? Them and Portland, they both are rebuilding teams and are trying to develop the young players that they have. So, those are my tiers. Those are how I feel like the Western Conference is at this point in the offseason, and it could definitely change. The list is fluid, but at the same time, let me know what you think, right? Do you agree with my tiers? Do you agree with my grades, right? Do you think my grades were fair or unfair? Let me know in the comment section below, and please leave a like It definitely helps the channel, and subscribe as well. But that will do it for this edition of Inside the Lines. We'll see you next time. But until next time, we hope you keep it inside the lines.